listening to the Lending Edge podcast, hosted by Scott Rose. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Lending Edge podcast. I'm your host, Scott Rose. Thanks for listening in. Today, I'm excited to have my guest, James Dwiggins, join me in a great discussion related to the NAR settlement and everything around the real estate landscape that's impacted by that settlement and some of the potential changes, coming our way. James is a tech-forward leader, an industry veteran. He keeps himself extremely busy. He's a co-founder of NextHome, one of the leading nationwide real estate brokerages. He also recently founded Raise.com and is the host of the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast, which if you haven't tuned in, you definitely should. We'll make sure to include links to all of this in the description so you can check it all out. James is one of the more outspoken individuals related to the NAR settlement, sharing his opinions and views on how that will impact the space, etc. So again, super excited to sit down with him today and try to get some questions answered for the rest of us out there kind of looking in from the outside. We're going to break down the NAR settlement. We're going to talk about how the market may operate post August 17th, get into things like dual agency, the MLS landscape, clear cooperation policy, and much more. So with that said, let's get started. James, thanks for joining me today, man.
Scott,
it's a pleasure
thanks
to
for
have
having
you.
me. Appreciate it. I'm excited.
I know you're super busy, so I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I mean, you're running multiple companies, you've got podcasts, you're being asked to go on other people's podcasts regularly, and you've just got so much great insight into what's going on in your space. So really excited to dive in with you today.
I'm excited to share with everybody.
Maybe just real quickly to get started, because we probably have a varying audience today. Give us just a quick background on James and how you got to where you are today, and maybe a little bit on kind of a couple of the businesses and things you got going on.
Yeah, I'll do it fast because nobody cares. But I'm third generation in residential real estate. My grandfather started his real estate company in 1967. Both my grandparents were real estate brokers. Both my parents were. I worked at their company early on. And I got into prop tech when I was 19, started a company, sold it when I was 21, then started another prop tech company, sold it when I was 26. Went to work for a franchise after that called Realty World here in Northern California at about 420 offices, was the VP of tech there, and then worked up to be vice president, and then eventually bought that with my partner today. And then my partner and I started a new venture called NextHome, which is the franchise that we operate today around the country. We have about 630 real estate offices, about 6,000 agents, do around 12 billion in volume. And then about 2 years ago, I started working on a new prop tech venture called Raise. We'll talk a little bit about that today, but which is designed to help agents articulate their value in this post lawsuit world. So that's been a fun venture. Raised about 4.2 million to get that up and going. The product actually went live this week, which is super cool. So yeah, been in the business a long time. Kind of sat in all the seats, which I think gives me a little bit of unique perspective in that, I've worked in every aspect of this business. And so I've seen the industry from prop tech, from brokerage, from franchise, and just having some experiences, I think that are a little bit different. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, it's clear that you've taken an approach where you leverage technology in the business. So you've got a very technological approach to how you build strategy around these companies that you're working in. And I think it helps a lot when you have such a broad perspective of all stakeholders and things going on to be able to drive those strategies and technologies. So
yeah.
Which is great. And you mentioned, you kind of mentioned it a second ago, like with Raise, building solutions around a lot of these changes. And so, one of the things really was excited to get into with you today, because you know more on this topic than anybody I know, is around the, NAR recent settlement. Can you kind of unpack that for all of us a little bit? Just,
Yeah.
help the layman understand what's been going on.
Yeah. So I'm not going to recap the lawsuits. I'm sure everybody's somewhat familiar with that at this point, but the simple version is basically antitrust claims stating that the industry is conspired to prop up commissions by using rules that NAR has in place governing the MLS, and then the mechanism of the MLS requiring a unilateral offer of compensation in advance of anybody even seeing a house. So the idea is that the listing agent's sitting down with the seller and they're saying, I'm going to charge you this, and we're going to remit a certain percentage back to the buyer's agent. The lawyers basically did a great job of convincing a jury that there was this massive conspiracy, which there wasn't, but neither here nor there. And won. And so basically what's happened is part of the settlement that everyone's heard about, and, NAR entered into a settlement on March 15th. That date basically states that some rules need to change. Number one is that agents, specifically listing agents, can no longer share commissions on the MLS. So you can't say I'm charging whatever number and I'm going to remit the seller is willing to pay X amount to the buyer's agent. That's no longer allowed on the MLS. They believe that that's going to get rid of steering, which also doesn't occur. But that's essentially part of the reason for that. They can still technically do cooperative compensation where the listing agent sits down and says to the seller, I'm going to charge you X%, remit part of that to the buyer's agent. That can happen. And technically that can still be advertised. It just can't be advertised on the MLS or commingled with MLS data. So basically an agent could put it on their own listing. They could put it on social media. They could rent an airplane and put it on the back of the banner. Like, they can do whatever they want to advertise a specific listing. You just can't commingle it with MLS data or have it on the MLS, which, we'll get into this, but there's really no reason to do it that way anymore anyway. We'll talk about sort of this new consumer-centric model that we need to be moving towards, but that's essentially the summation of it. And part of that settlement, all these rules go into effect by August 17th. So the MLS is going to make changes where that cooperative compensation is no longer in it. One of the other changes is mandatory buyer rep agreements for NAR governed MLSs. Just for clarity, there are about 30 of them that are not, but for NAR governed MLSs, a mandatory buyer rep agreement, which means that before a buyer sees a property on the MLS, they have to sign either an exclusive or non-exclusive buyer rep agreement, for all intents and purposes, establishing fiduciary with the agent for either that property or a period of time. It's all negotiable, but they will not be allowed to see those homes without being under some type of buyer rep agreement. And there's actually benefits to that. Just conceptually, I think people are like, well, I don't want to do that. Remember, the seller doesn't want a bunch of looky-loos going through their house. And so one of the mechanisms of finding the intent of the individual is to determine whether they're just casually running around wanting to look at houses or whether they're actually a serious buyer. That will help stop some of that. And it's also a protection for the buyer and the agent in that we are establishing fiduciary and, more importantly, the fee. So that concept is simple. We sit down. This is what I do. This is my agreement. This is what I charge. This is the services that I provide. And now a buyer will shop agents to determine which agent they want to work with and at what rate before they go and start touring properties. I'll stop there to see if you have any questions on that.
Yeah, a couple quick questions for you. First question on the most recent comments is around MLS governed MLSs by NAR, right? You said that there's approximately 30% that are not, so 70%.
30 total, not 30%. So there's about 520 MLSs in the United States.
So a sliver then.
A small sliver of them are not. Almost all of them are governed by NAR rules and are also covered under the settlement and therefore have to comply with the settlement terms.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So basically this type of settlement will become common practice across the country.
Yeah.
Because so many of them are governed.
They almost all will follow because they're covered in the release that NAR negotiated. So the MLS is no longer, potentially can be sued. So they're all going to follow it. The roughly 30 that are not NAR governed MLSs are making choices on whether they want to jump into the settlement, pay some money to the lawyers,
Yeah.
which is where it all goes basically. And basically be covered by the release, or they can choose not to. And a lot of them are choosing not to. They're basically saying, we're not going to pay several $1 million in settlement costs. We think that we're in the right. We'll make some changes to our practice. We think the lawyers' cases against us are thin. And so they're saying no. And so you've seen that with a few of them, such as MLS PIN, which is under, they've been sued separately in a different case. That's called No Select versus MLS PIN. And then in the Northwest MLS, which is a very large MLS, they said, no, we're not going to follow those rules. And technically, they've been doing a lot of the changes long before these lawsuits occurred. So I think they have a very good shot of, I think that lawyers trying to sue them would have a very weak case.
Hard time.
And yeah, they'd have a hard time with that. But the point is, most everybody's going to follow these rules to some degree or another. So
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other question I had was, obviously, as a non-expert, we're all out there, we're reading all the media from where we can get as much information as we can. But one question I have is around, the advertising you talked about of the commission on the buy side not being able to be done on the MLS platform, but maybe in some of these other forums it will be, that they're not being restricted from doing it on your own website, like you said, social media, etc. Is the DOJ though still kind of pointing out that maybe they don't want that to happen based off of their recent comments, and that they could, even after the NAR settlement, they could push for more? Or help us understand that.
Yeah,
where do you think that ends up?
So two things with that. Number one is the Department of Justice doesn't have anything it really can do in these civil cases except file, a brief basically saying we contest to the way this is going. They can do a CID, which is a civil investigative demand, where it's like a subpoena for information without filing a lawsuit. That's the kind of power that they have. But if they want to change things, they have to file their own lawsuits, to be clear. So
Okay.
I think people mix that a little bit. The DOJ can come in and say, we don't like this, we want you to change it. But at the end of the day, if the judge and everybody else is like, yeah, we don't give a shit, then they just continue forward. And then the DOJ would have to go and do its own suits to change the course. So to answer your question directly, I believe the DOJ is not going to contest the settlement terms that have been outlined. I do not believe Michael Ketchmark, the lawyer that was the lead plaintiff lawyer for Burnett Sitzer, who won the case in Missouri, did not talk with the Department of Justice before creating the settlement. That would be insane. And everyone knows that they're all having these backdoor conversations because they're all sort of going towards the same goal. So with that being said, I don't believe that they will contest it. Where the DOJ has issues, and I think you'll see this come into play, is the conversation is this, and it really, and this will lead into another part of our discussion. But if we got sued for basically advertising compensation on the MLS in advance, and there's a lot of controversy around it, but let's just follow that base. The MLS was the mechanism. There were rules in place that required you to offer compensation. And you were using a common platform amongst all these companies to create the conspiracy. If you take that off MLS and now put it into the forms, so follow me here, the association creates a form that everybody in the market uses that is created by 20 brokers sitting in a room collectively coming up with what that standard form should look like. And now in the form, the agent's sitting down with the seller and saying, I charge X, I'm going to remit Y to the other brokerage. Pretty confident that could get us back into antitrust claims because we just moved the same practice off of the MLS onto forms.
Yeah.
That's where the DOJ has been investigating recently. So as you see in the headlines, the DOJ is sending a CID to the California Association of Realtors, and there are others that aren't in the public yet. They're basically saying, we want to see what you're doing because does it violate the spirit of the settlement, which was essentially, now to directly answer your question, the Department of Justice does not want commission sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think of it as like a consumer myself. If I'm in the market and I'm buying a home, the way I think of these changes would be that, let's say I'm working with you, James, and it's like we're going to go buy a property together. We would decide potentially what that comp would be that you're going to get paid to support me in this process.
Correct.
And we could put that in our offer, right? If we wanted to be more
Correct.
competitive, I could say, James, I'm going to pay you over here on the side, 35K or whatever it is. And let's make an offer with zero requests for them to pay our commissions. Could our offer be more competitive that way? Or we make the offer, we up our offer price, and
Yeah.
we say, I'd like you to pay James 35,000.
Look,
And it's just
this
part of the
whole
offer, right?
yes, and this whole thing is so stupid to me because I just go, I use this analogy. In this new consumer-centric world where we're doing it differently. So seller's agent sits down with the seller, negotiates whatever their rate is. Could be percentage, could be flat rate, whatever they decide to do. That's between them. That's between the seller and the seller's agent. To your point, buyer's agent sits down with you and says, Scott, this is what I charge. Here's this range of services that I offer. Here's all the things that I do. And you're like, great. I love it. Let's do it. And then they explain, look, Scott, here's how I'm going to get compensated. Okay. We have a couple ways to do this. One way, to your point, is you can pay me directly. And then if we're in a very competitive offer situation, we can remove that stipulation from the purchase contract. So we're just going in with the offer without having to have the seller come up with money to pay me. So option A, you pay it. Option B, put in the purchase contract. We're offering a full price offer, but also sellers to pay the buyer's agent's commission of whatever was negotiated. This is really important. What was negotiated between you and the buyer or between you and the agent. So if that number was lower, then the seller is only having to pay that. In the previous model, the seller was just offering this unilateral blanket number to everybody. And it makes no sense to me, right? The third option, I'll come back to this, is a concession. So you could also say, we're going to require or request that the seller offers a concession towards buyer's closing costs of X, and then the buyer can do what they want with that, whether it's 2-1 buy down, replace the deck, pay their agent. All of those are an opportunity. Or you can also request the seller pays your agent's commission in the purchase contract, and you can ask for concessions. Yeah. Both of those are options. So that's the 4 ways that it works. Now, to the point I'm going to make, it makes no sense to me, the more I've thought about this, of why in the hell a seller would offer anything in advance. I know this can be controversial because people don't like it when I say this, but it's like, I just go, well, look, all I'm going to do as a seller is say this. We're willing to entertain any and all requests, put it in the purchase contract. We're willing to entertain anything.
Yeah. 100%.
You could say, you can buy my helicopter, leave it with the house, the furniture, like all the stuff we do, just put it in the purchase contract. And then as a seller and the listing agent, we're going to take all the offers, compare them, maybe counter all of them. Maybe we counter one of them. Maybe we accept one of them. Like we can do whatever we want with it. But to me, why would I show my hand without seeing what the buyer wants to do? And to your comment you made earlier, which is absolutely dead on, is it's like, okay, well, the buyer can't afford to pay the agent. I get that. Most people can't. Real estate is economically expensive. So, by the way, you dealt with that problem in 2021. It's not anything different. So now instead of that, you just go, I'm asking you to pay the buyer's agent's commission, but we're going to write it for 100,000 over. It's just logical.
Yeah. To me, it seems like it's better for both the buyer and the seller, and it creates a more competitive environment for all that to take place, because you also have different levels of buying agents, right? Some are good, some are bad.
Yeah.
You should
and that's another
want
piece
to
of
attract the good ones to show what they've been able to do, right? If I'm out there looking for a buying agent, I'm going to find one that's been able to leverage this system to do what's best for both parties.
Or you're looking for someone to do the services that you need, and there's nothing wrong with that. You may be experienced, which I know you are. So like, you're like, look, I don't need the agent to do everything. I need to have them do these things. And so a menu of services agent where they go, we charge X to do these specific functions, might be what you need. You also might be a person who's like, I don't have time to do any of this shit. So like, I need an agent just to handle it all. And by the way, I'm willing to pay a premium if you can even pack all my crap and get it loaded up and unpack it and get the land. Like, there are people that are willing to pay more because they just want someone to conveniently handle everything. I think those are all the future. One comment everyone needs to know: as part of the settlement, whatever the fee is that the buyer's agent and buyer agree to in that buyer rep agreement is the only fee that can be paid. So even if a seller was offering a higher amount as a concession, well, I should say as cooperative compensation, the agent
The buyer
cannot make
agreement.
more than what was agreed to in the buyer rep agreement, which is, in my opinion, the right way to handle it. So
Could they make less? Like,
can
what if
they?
we went into, like, what if I had a buying agent, we agreed to, let's just say 3%, I'm paying them, but we got to a certain property and I'm an agent. I'm like, look, Scott, I really want you to get this house. I know things are tight. I'm going to drop mine to 2% on
Sure,
this offer. Yeah, you can.
sure,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, we do that today, right? We
Yeah.
make deals come
Yeah.
together. So
Yeah.
absolutely, you just can't go above it. So
Got
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that that works out better for everybody. As a consumer, I like to have more control over what I'm paying an agent. And look, you said it earlier. I always think I bring this up all the time. If I'm buying a house in a market that I know nothing about, if I'm moving somewhere or I'm buying a second home or something of that nature, you're going to want representation. You
Oh
don't know
yeah.
anything about that market. You'll be happy to pay that on a big asset purchase like that. Of course but if you're in your backyard, you've bought, 5 houses in this area, or you're a real estate appraiser and you know value and
You
you
need
feel highly
contract help.
confident in what you're doing, you just need contract help. Yeah, you
Totally
don't
get
need
it.
to
And there's
pay all
nothing
this
wrong with
money.
that. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. That's literally what this is designed to do. I think there's two things to think about, by the way, while we're talking about this. I've done some research and talking to insurance companies, which most people haven't done. Um, really fascinating statistics. So dual agency is going to be a big topic because it's like, well, I'll just go directly to the listing agent and
Can you break
essentially.
that down real quick before you
Yeah.
dive into that? Because I'm glad you go. Can you just explain dual agency for
Yeah,
us?
well, I'm going to give you my definition and then it varies by state. I want to be very clear. So I'm going to
Okay.
generalize this because states have different versions of it, but essentially it's the same agent representing the buyer and the seller.
Okay.
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 Different states will classify dual agency differently. So in some states, dual agency is even if it's two agents in the same organization. But the real definition that most people call it is the same agent representing the buyer and seller, which 9 states currently outlaw. It's illegal. You cannot do it because you shouldn't be allowed to do it.
Yeah.
There's no scenario where you don't have bias if you are a dual
Yeah.
agent. The end.
Yeah.
And the only reason why companies do it, and I'm not shy about this, is greed. They're looking to try and double in a deal and make more money. It's not beneficial to the consumer. Every study has been shown it does not benefit them. They usually make less money. And then even if a property is off market, which is a whole other conversation, meaning not on the MLS specifically,
Uh-huh.
they lose on average up to 15% of the value when a property is done dual agent off the MLS. There's a study by
Okay.
Bright MLS that was fascinating that went into this. But dual agency will increase, going to be a big hot topic. You're going to see states move to ban it. I think you'll see more of that coming. I think the DOJ will have a significant issue with it. There'll be studies done. Probably the Consumer Federation of America will do studies on this and go, this is what happens to consumers. It's going to be a big mess. Brokerage will have to decide what they want to do in that policy. And to my comment, insurance companies do not like it. Their payouts are between 10, 15, and as high as 20% higher on dual agency because it's hard to defend them. And you're going to
This is like
see,
errors and emissions insurance for agents. Yeah.
and so you'll see those rates go up, which means it gets passed down to the brokerage, which means it gets passed down to the agent, which means it gets passed down to the consumer potentially.
Yeah.
So a big mess is coming there as well. And I had this whole chart on what the numbers were, and it was staggering the difference between when it's dual agency versus not. So big
Because
issues
you
there
see,
coming.
insurers might just say, look, we're not going to cover you on a dual agency
I think
transaction.
it
You just can't do them. Yeah.
I think it will go there.
Yeah.
Yep. Because as soon
So,
as it's a small percentage now, but imagine if that number on risk goes up to 10, 20% of the market, they'll be like, whoa, I
yeah.
want nothing
Yeah.
to do with that. So yeah, I think that's a big problem that's coming.
That makes sense. While we're talking about MLS, there's so much happening, and maybe some of this is an effect of the NAR settlement and people starting to recognize these changes, right? They're no longer now the commission holder that they've always kind of been, and that might not be the most sophisticated way to say it. Maybe you have a better way, but we're seeing changes take place. There's the RE Colorado news that's been going on the last couple of weeks, potentially being acquired by a private equity company,
Yeah,
when
it's a
it
guy
was
that
going to
owns a
be,
title company, actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think originally there were certain folks inside that thought they were going to buy the platform.
Yeah.
So maybe what I'd like to know is, first off, maybe dive in a little bit to what you see going on related to the RE Colorado transaction, and also just kind of in general around MLS, um, multi-listing services. What's their role? I mean, look, they play, I think of it from an appraiser perspective. They play a really important role to hosting the history of transactions for
Hmm.
research,
Hmm.
and having that single platform in place to go, I think is really important. So this
Huge.
disruption is going to be really interesting to find out how and where it goes. Like, help us understand what's going on here. What do you see taking place? Can you give us some insight?
Yeah, I can. So I'll just start with RE Colorado really fast because this is I think this is more of a drama thing than people are make. I think it's being made into be something bigger than what it
More
is.
than it
And
is.
yeah, I don't think this is like some massive play where Wall Street firms are going to buy up MLSs all over the country. This just happened to be a one-off. The gentleman that's buying it owns a title business in the area, and he did get venture money, or actually private equity money to do it. I, there's bad blood there is the short gist of it. The two associations that own the MLS do not get along with the executive team that ran the MLS. The executive team that ran the MLS was working on buying out the associations, um, and a backdoor deal was done, and they sold it out from underneath the executives. All the executives got fired. There's a new team that's running it. Basically, there was just a different deal that was done, and there's not a lot of love lost there. So I think a lot of this is based upon sort of a relationship history than necessarily some sort of strategic play by Wall Street to get into the MLS space. Um, that being said, I think you're going to see a lot of MLS consolidation. There's roughly 520 of them across the U.S. I think you're going to see attrition rates of somewhere between 20 to 40% of the agents will go away as things move. You'll see about 10% of all that has already occurred over the past 12 months, especially as the numbers come out for renewals. I think you've got another, like I said, another 10 to 30% to go, depending upon whether buyer agent commissions can be financed in the loan. It's a big issue. So that's going to affect membership at MLSs and associations because they obviously charge
Yeah,
annual
that's
dues.
that's
And
their
so you'll
revenue stream,
of
right? Yeah.
course. Yeah. And so you'll see consolidation occur amongst the smaller ones, which we need anyway, because there's too many damn MLSs as it is. So again, I think this is a little bit more of a one-off. I wouldn't look at this as like, oh my God, it's beginning of, Wall Street's taking over. This is not what this is. Um, Now, as far as the role of the MLS, everyone has been looking at the MLS as, just it was all about cooperative compensation. I disagree a lot with that statement. I think it's important I think was part of it, but having a repository of one central place where all data on almost every house sale that's occurred is extremely important for mortgage,
Agreed.
appraisal,
Yep.
comps, all of these things that happen in our day-to-day business. And that has not gone away. And in fact, if anything, that's being shown as even more important based upon Bing and trying to scrape data and AI grabbing data. And how are we making sure this data is being used properly? So the biggest thing you're going to see happen right now is this. MLSs, the large ones, are moving to they've removed their offer of compensation field, or will by August 17th. And most of them are moving to a concession field. And so the big question that's happening right now is a concession just another, just another way to do an offer of compensation? No. First, concession is to the buyer, not to the agent. So everyone needs to like separate these things. So seller concession to buyer direct does not have anything to do with the agents in this particular example. Number two, it is illegal. It is an antitrust violation. It's called restraint of trade to restrict a seller from offering an incentive to a buyer. If the Department of Justice or attorneys want to go after that, then literally capitalism of America is done. It's over. Because you can't offer any type of anything, 15% off, $5,000 to off the price. You can't do that anymore. So A seller in America who owns a property has every right to offer a concession or incentive to a buyer to do something. The issue that everybody forgets is that it's just removing the agents from that process. So a seller concession field is where you're going to go. And then here's the controversy. You can offer a concession up front, but is the MLS going to collect what the concession was finally negotiated as? So if I wanted to offer some type of concession up front, was it different in the end? And MLSs are really concerned about this data because they think that they're going to get sued again. I don't know how you don't not collect that data, because if I've got 5 comps to, I've got a listing that I'm going to get and I'm using 5 comps and I don't know whether there was a 1%, 2%, 3%, certain dollar amount concession offered, how am I supposed to understand the actual value of that house and what was given as an incentive? Because if it was 1 to 3%, it's a pretty big variance, right?
Yeah.
You need that on the appraisal side. All of this stuff is important. So I personally think that the MLSs need to push back on the Department of Justice if they say you can't be collecting that data. It's like, well, that's literally what we do. We need to have access to this data to properly figure out how do these deals compare for both pricing, helping the seller understand, like this is a conversation the agents want to have. The seller goes, 5 houses down the street, they're identical to mine, same floor plan, same everything, sold for $1 million. And by the way, I don't want to offer any compensation to the buyer's agent. I'm not offering any concessions. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, just to be clear, those comps that you're referring to all had a 2%, 3%, 1% concession being offered. So you can't ask for the same price when that's the difference in those deals. Without that data, how are you supposed to have that conversation?
Totally agree. It's a huge, when I think about the MLS, a huge value is tracking the transactional information. Right.
Yeah.
And having that there for everybody to use. The other thing I think about, and really, I guess something I wanted to dive in with you a little bit is around MLS and then also some of these major consumer platforms, homes.com, Zillow, realtor.com. Was it Redfin? Another one.
They're a brokerage, to be clear. They're not a portal.
Brokerage.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
As an agent, the value to the agent and the community, one, putting your property on the MLS can become essentially a conduit to push out to these consumer-based platforms.
It
that
is,
have,
to be clear.
kind of become, right? It is. These have become common places for consumers to go. Everybody knows that.
They get their
Consumers
data
are
from the MLS.
They get their data from the MLS.
Correct.
But what would stop at some point from bypassing the MLS and just putting the data directly onto these consumer-based platforms is where you market your property instead of marketing it on the MLS.
So
what we lose from that is potentially we lose some of the transactional history, or now appraisers have to start going out to all these different platforms to try to track and understand what's going on. They're not governed potentially, etc.
correct.
I mean,
It's
how
a
do
mess.
we ensure and protect to try to keep the MLS as part of the transaction because of the importance of these things we've just been talking about?
This isn't a great example on where the Department of Justice and the plaintiffs' lawyers have absolutely no clue how our industry operates. Like they're so misguided, it's unreal. So what you're not proposing, what you're talking about is how it used to be. So I'll go back in time a little bit. Zillow and not Realtor, they've always gotten their data from the MLS, but Zillow, Trulia, other portals used to go directly to the brokerages and agents to get the data. Now, I've been doing this a really long time. And I say this lovingly to any agents out there, but they're not good at details. They're good. They suck at most of the other stuff behind the scenes. And so what happens is you're getting data aggregated from thousands of different companies with thousands of different systems. And what you get is the agent forgot to change the status. They didn't update the platform. They didn't enter the listing into the platform. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And what they were always dealing with, I know because they aggregated data for me in the past too, was constantly trying to figure out how to get bad data off the systems. Who has the most accurate one? What if the agent entered the damn thing into 4 different platforms? Which one is the truth, the source of truth? Mm-hmm. It was a disaster. And so what Zillow did and the others did is they got a broker's license in every single area where there's an MLS to get the MLS data, which is the single source of truth. Almost every agent enters in their listings into the MLS. So instead of having to manage 5 different platforms, they managed one that they knew they needed to do. And that then controlled and created this marketplace where basically the data you see on Zillow and Realtor is identical because it's coming from the same source. So the consumer benefit of that has been massive, in that they're not seeing listings that are not on one portal versus another. They're not seeing inaccurate data. They're getting the most current information. That's been a huge benefit to consumers. To answer your question more directly, if homes.com, which would be the one that would try to do this, in my opinion, was like, hey, just bring your stuff directly to us, we're going to try and be the MLS, I don't see it happening. And the reason I don't see it happening is, why would I want to do that? A, what's the reason for that? Because homes.com is in the business of generating leads and charging people for that. Number 2, it's another thing I got to manage. Number 3, who governs it? Who governs the rules for that? How do we make sure everybody's playing by the same rules? Like this is literally taking 40 years to get the MLS, which isn't perfect, but it is better than any other market in the world, to be clear. There's not a single country that comes close to how we organize data here in the United States. And so it's not perfect, but it works really damn well. And I think if you try to go down that road, it's going to be a mess. It'll be the wild, wild west. Some listings will be on, some won't.
Right.
Take CCP, for example. So the Department of Justice is going to investigate the clear cooperation policy. For everybody to understand, that means CCP means that if I'm an agent in the MLS and I take a listing, I have to put it in the MLS within 24 hours of taking that listing. The reason is to stop people from holding listing inventory off market, trying to sell it.
Is that an NAR policy, by the way?
Correct.
Is that part of the governance? Okay.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah. And so the DOJ is going to investigate this. I think it would be a catastrophic mistake to try and have NAR get rid of clear cooperation policy, because I think it's pro-consumer. There are exclusions in the policy that allow people to not put properties on the MLS if it's like an office exclusive. And there's things that I think that should be gotten rid of that benefit large brokerages. But the fundamentals of the policy are important. Go to a world where the CCP doesn't exist. And agents can go, I'm going to put this one on the MLS, but I'm going to keep this one off. And I'm going to tell my seller that, like, we should do this one off market, which then I can bring a buyer to you directly, and I'll do dual.
These are like, what is that, pocket listing? Is that essentially what that is?
Yeah. Yep. And it's a complete abomination for sellers. They get screwed in every one of those scenarios. So the MLS is extraordinarily important. I don't think portals will be that future. I don't think agents would support it. And certainly agents wouldn't support it if it was Zillow. Like, nobody likes Zillow that much. So I think that would be, I'm not saying that I don't, I'm just saying agents have a problem with Zillow.
Yeah. No, I get it. I think it's, as an agent, I'm not, but if I were a listing agent, I would prefer to be able to put my property on one platform and let it syndicate out to all the consumer-based platforms, because I don't know which platform the consumer is going to go to. I mean, my wife likes Zillow, someone else's likes Realtor.com, whatever you're comfortable with. You want it to be on all of those platforms that the consumers are picking.
I would actually argue you have a fiduciary to that. Like, you have a fiduciary to put that property on the MLS. To get as much
exposure as possible to the property. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Now, I'll give you one other comment just to think about MLS stuff. So here's where I think the MLSs will go. There's a very interesting opportunity right now, and this is going to be really controversial what I'm going to say. So there's a very interesting opportunity right now for MLSs to shift direction and increase value. Right now, if you think about MLSs, they're a repository of listing data, basically. What happens if the MLS was a repository of buyer data? Where, for instance, they're aggregating, and I know there's a lot of complexities to this. People are going to say you're insane, James. That's fine. But if it was to aggregate the every buyer and the buyer rep agreement they signed with their agent, and the terms, this buyer is on a buyer rep agreement with Scott exclusively for 90 days. Okay. And we enter in the MLS, we anomalize this. So nobody sees who you are, the buyer, Scott. It's just, I know that I log into the MLS and I put Scott down as my buyer for a 90 days. And this is the, phone number and email address. Now that's not given out to anybody. So just follow me here. If all of a sudden I could also enter in Scott's looking for a 5-bedroom, 4-bath home in Aspen or whatever, making this up, but like, you know, this is what he's looking for, and was able to tell listing agents that James, Scott's agent, has a buyer looking for a property similar to the one that you currently have listed. Now we're creating this reverse prospecting piece. So now we're bringing buyers and agents together in a platform. Now I'm going to go a step further, and here's my controversial statement. Imagine if, in theory, you had this buyer repository. So the MLS has the listings and it's got the agents representing buyers, and it creates a database. And this database, you can open up an API to it and you integrate it with a CRM system. And that database is essentially, again, it's anomalized. It's not going to tell you who the buyer is, but it's simply going to state every time a lead is filled out on a portal, Zillow, a website, whatever, and that lead comes in and it hits this database and it goes, this is a lead that came in and, you know, they're looking to buy a house. And the system goes, no, that's not actually a lead. That's Scott. Scott's actually a buyer working with James. He's under an exclusive buyer rep agreement for 90 days. That agent who got that lead no longer is a lead and isn't going to spend any time on it and isn't going to pay for it either. Because if you think about it, we generate roughly, I think, like 80 million leads a year on the buy side, yet there's only 4.2 million people that buy a house. It's a big delta between
huge. Yeah. How much time are you wasting on all those non-leads?
Imagine if all of a sudden this database was online that was plugged into CRM systems to tell you this is a lead. They're not working with anybody. This isn't a lead, which would be a majority of them. They're working with somebody. And in this new world where you're having to sign buyer rep agreements because that's required, all of a sudden the lead game business would get decimated. And it would save a lot of money for the brokerage and agent, et cetera.
Yeah, because people pay a lot of money for those leads, don't they?
Oh, you have no idea.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some interesting opportunities for MLSs to move and adjust and increase their value in this new world. And I believe that's around buyer rep agreements. And I believe that's around aggregating that data and then creating systems to help the agents work around that data that could make them even more valuable than they are today. So I don't know if anybody, if MLS is listening, there's your idea of the year. So
yeah, no, I think that's great. They need to continue to find ways to create that value because from a real estate appraiser perspective, it would just be a shame to lose that source, source of truth, that single place where all data is captured and stored for history, for valuation.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the MLS is going to play that part. I think it's going to get itself worked out, but there's going to be a lot of controversy along the way.
And some consolidation could be good. I think of MLSs and I visit with some of them as well. And, because we have products that we integrate with MLS to support the appraiser, right? Our permissible use is allowing that data to be used to generate appraisals. We create efficiencies for appraisers. We do a lot to help them support their process. But they, as being over 500 of them, each individual one doesn't necessarily have the capital to invest into their platforms. But if you consolidated, you could potentially increase that capital and create better platforms and more value for your consumers by doing so, right? It has some value to some level of consolidation.
It does.
To go on in that space.
Most people have been in the industry a long time. I've talked to a lot of MLS execs, and most people agree there needs to be about 100 total in the US. Some of them will be statewide. Some of them will have different pockets that are just a unique market where it needs its own individual MLS just because it operates differently or it just sits in a different location. But most people agree somewhere around 100 is the number. And so we've got a lot of consolidation to go. And you're right, these small MLSs, they don't have the platforms, they don't have the resources. And also associations are in deep trouble, like they just are, because so much of the MLS is tied to the association. So, you have to be a member of the MLS, you have to be a member of the association, and that gets their revenues in. And I think you're going to see.
And that's changing, right? Is that part of the settlement where
it's
no
not
longer
directly,
you have to be okay?
No, it's not directly related to that, but there's some of the companies were required not to require membership in NAR, like Remax and some of the bigger settlements. But
okay.
definitely going to be a lot of consolidation in the space over the next 24 to 36 months. And it's needed.
Yeah, like what is it? So we haven't even been talking about that. MLSs are separate from the associations, although a lot of these
Some of them are owned
associations
by the
own the
associations.
MLSs,
Correct.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's just totally dependent upon the market. Some of them are broker owned MLSs. Some of them are association owned MLSs. It's kind of a mixed bag all over the place. But in either case, you're going to see a lot of consolidation. There's no scenario where if we lose 20% of the membership and as high as 40, that you won't see a lot of these smaller ones get gobbled up into being part of bigger ones. They just, basic math tells you they have to do it.
that's the MLS. Does the association also consolidate too?
MLS
Then?
association is going to get hit harder than the MLS because agents don't look at the associations as a necessity. They do look at the MLS as a necessity. So MLS is where they don't require you to be a part of the association.
They drop their membership to the association.
They're gonna struggle. Yeah, for sure.
Does that have any unintended consequences from your view, or
it does?
No?
Yeah. So I've been very vocal about this. So the National Association of Realtors has certainly had a lot of controversy over the past 2 years, and they've made a lot of mistakes. But it is arguably the strongest lobby in DC.
Yeah.
And so the biggest issue that we face is Washington, DC is basically a pay to play. I'm summarizing here, but that's really what it comes down to. We vote to put people in office and then they don't give a shit about what they said during the campaign. It's all about lobbying and money. And if we don't have the kind of power that Shannon McGann and her team has in DC, which is immense power, by the way, then they're going to pass bills that are going to affect private property rights in this country and make it even harder than what it is to own. We obviously have an issue. We don't have enough housing. Like, it's a huge problem that everyone's finally waking up to. It's the single biggest driver of generational wealth, period. And so this is an important thing that there's somebody advocating. NAR does a very good job of putting money into candidates that are supporting those rights, both Democrat and Republican. It's almost split depending upon where the money goes. And to my point, if the associations are weakened, then there's less money coming in because you join an association and the dues you pay, part of it goes to local, state, and national. And all of these things work in this process. So you have local lobbying, you have state lobbying, and national lobbying. And so it is incredibly naive of the industry to be like, I don't want to pay the NAR dues. Get the hell out. Leave real estate. Because if you can't pay the $56 that goes to NAR, grow up. Like that money.
I think just to jump in, appraisers are very disparate, like real estate agents, right? We have all these individuals out there working on their own all over the country, super disparate. And organization is really important when you operate that way. You need to organize a voice and also be able to, from an NAR perspective, push information back out to this constituency.
100%.
It's very disparate. It's the same with appraisers. Like, they have a couple, we don't need to get into it. It's not great. I don't think it could be way better in terms of how appraisers organize, understand, generate narrative, really understand how to drive our industry forward in a positive way. That's what these groups do. It's how you organize and put everybody together. It's super important.
It's massive. And the National Association of Realtors has is significant war chest of money. And so do the states, for that matter. California Association of Realtors is a massive lobby. And I was talking with the president, and we'll go through some of the conversation, but she was just mentioning how a congressman was trying to pass a bill, and they were like, well, apparently there was some move where they decided to open up their war chest of funds to go against it. And it's amazing how fast the congressman changed tone and went a different direction, because they're like, if you want to do this, we're going to put a ton of money against getting you removed from office. Not directly saying it that way, but kind of like posturing. And if we don't have a voice at the table, you're on the menu. It's just really that simple.
Could not agree more. So, moving on, real quick, what do you see as the best outcome of this? Like, what's best for the industry, for consumers, for constituents and stakeholders? How do you see all these kind of changes turning into opportunity, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think that the way my crystal ball is this, it's going to be murky and messy for a while. The biggest mess will start August 17th when, half the agents who weren't paying attention are like, where is the offer of compensation on the MLS? that will happen. Um, Buyer rep agreements are going to be a mess for a while. Brokers are going to create agreements that are not pro-consumer, that are very one-sided towards the company. You're seeing the Consumer Federation of America already issue statements on this. I think you'll see more investigations. I think the states will eventually, make sure everybody hears that, step in and create state drawn up and mandated buyer rep agreements, such as Washington, North Carolina. A lot of them have them already. So it's a standardized form that the state requires, that are clean, clear, concise. I do think you'll see that happen on the buyer rep side. Not quickly enough. It'll be messy before we get there. I think you're going to see listing forms be a big debate. This is currently happening. Do we share commissions in those forms? I'm urging people not to use those forms if they're drawn up by an association with a committee. I think you're asking for problems. If the brokers want to create their own forms, then there's no conspiracy because I'm using my own form, not a shared one between other companies. I don't think that's a good idea either, because then you lose the standardization of a listing form, which makes it a wild, wild west mess. That's a problem that I think you're going to see pop up. Eventually that will get cleared up. And look, I think the consumer wins in this scenario, and I think it's good for the industry because good agents will stand out. Crappy agents will discount down because they don't know how to articulate value, and they'll provide these services that are minimal. And that may be good for some people. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I think agents who are really good at what they do will come to the table and go, this is my value. This is what I'm about. These are the services I offer. And there's going to be a significant number of consumers who want that kind of service. They don't wake up and go, hey, I have a 3-year-old and I love her dearly, but she's a terrorist. And so like nobody wakes up and goes, I got a career, my wife has a career, and we've got kids and a nanny and all these things. Go, let's just go do all this on our own. That doesn't happen in America. Great stat to know. 30% of households were dual income in 1960. It's almost 60% now. So with a dual income household, everybody's busy. They're looking for who's got the time, right? So I think agents just have to get very good at explaining what they do. It's a behind the curtain sort of industry that needs to be more transparent. And I think consumers will pay for that as long as there's a mechanism for them to do that. And so this is all going to sort itself out. There'll be less people, but more professional. I think consumers will have more choice. They've always had choice, but it'll just be a little bit more transparent on that choice. And I think that there'll be quite a few different models in play that will provide different options for the type of service that somebody is looking for. But I still think percentage and full service will be the standard used in our industry. So
no, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't necessarily think these changes are directly correlated to this potential outcome, but we've talked about it a little bit, in some of our discussions in the past, which is around how some of the verticals within the mortgage space and the real estate space and how they've operated so, independently of one another, right?
Yeah.
Title, appraisal, etc., home inspection. There's an opportunity to kind of create more synergy there and drive more efficiencies in the process by bringing these all up front at the point of list and doing more at the point of list to drive downstream efficiencies. What do you think about that?
I agree 100%. In fact, it's ironic, since we last chatted, I saw a piece of software that this gentleman's developing. I forgot the name, but I'll tell my head, I'll think of it in a minute. But it's a platform to adjust the presentation that agents use where it's collaborative. And what I mean by that is it allows the agent to put in the CMA. It allows the loan officer to put in different ways that you can structure the offer and finance that. It brings in the appraiser, it brings in the inspector. It was designed to be this collaborative experience to kind of holistically show everything about what's going to happen. I thought it was really smart. And I think that is the future. I think you're going to see, instead of this being so isolated that, well, this is my loan officer, call him or her. This is my appraiser, call him or her. It's more of a cohesive presentation. Maybe even people are coming together. I don't know. We'll see where this goes. But you and I had this conversation. You can't, in this world where, assuming most people are rational, that the planet is changing, we don't need to argue why it's changing, but it's changing. You can't go on, you can't sit down with a buyer or write an offer anymore, at least in a lot of states like mine in California or Florida or a bunch of others, without
Oh,
having your
yeah.
insurance guy looking at the damn property and going, can you do me a favor and tell me if we can even get this insured?
Yeah.
And B, what is that going to cost? Like, you're having to shift, instead of it being, let's write the offer, get into contract, and then we'll get an insurance policy. You got to reverse that now. Can we even do anything with this? What is that going to look like? What's it going to affect my payment? Blah, blah, blah. So like my
I
point
mean,
is,
another great opportunity. I don't mean to cut you
yeah,
off, but
please.
another great opportunity for the MLS to think about being able to consolidate all of this information, because you just had me thinking right away that the cost of insurance is going to be a direct impact to value. And as a real estate appraiser, I sure better know when I'm comparing properties, was this house insurable or this one not? Now you're going to try to find properties with similar aspects, but even here in the mountains, I know within just you know let's call it a 1,000 yards, one house to another, the fire rating could go from a 2 to a 9.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
difference for an insurability of the property is huge. And so if you don't understand that impact, that the cost to the consumer is going to be that much higher, that might drive the value of that property down a
Agreed.
bit more because of that fire danger, then you're missing something. These are all factors we need to start taking into consideration. And the MLS, in my mind, is a great place where all that data could be
I
hosted,
agree.
so the analysis and research could be done,
You
right?
know, um, I don't disagree with you. And I think that the future looks, I certainly could see the loan officer going out on a buyer presentation with the agent. I could see that being a realistic future where they're meeting together and the agent's covering everything on the property and the loan officer's covering how we can do all of the
Everything
financing
from a
aspects
mortgage,
of this.
right? Right.
100%.
I mean,
Yeah.
the loan officer is a huge component of navigating and supporting a buyer through a process, right? It's
Not many people have the cash to buy a home these days. They need
right.
financing. And then how we structure that financing in this sort of post August 17th world is going to be key too.
Yeah.
So it's here's 7 ways that we can structure the offer. This is what we think we can do. Your appraisal, by the way, we think the house will appraise for this. You can only go this high on your offer before it won't appraise.
Yeah.
Like that's all going to be part of the mechanism. So
I agree. James, my last question for you, man, again, I appreciate all your time. I
yeah,
always ask this question is, if you had a magic wand, you could change one thing right now to improve and make our industry better, what would it be?
tort reform. I'm partially joking. I'm partially serious
I
when I say
know.
that. One thing, well, so tort reform actually is a huge issue. I could talk about that all day long, but the legal system in this country is about as corrupt as it can get. Look, I think that there's a massive gap in leadership right now. And I really think the industry needs to find some strong leaders that can help people sort through all of this and give some real strength and direction on what to do, that these changes aren't the end of the world, that, not doing cooperative compensation isn't a bad thing. Like
Yeah.
there's actually there's a very bright future. And if we're looking at where the puck is going to be and we skate towards that, I think that we can be in a very good spot. Right now, everyone's very reactionary and very defensive and posturing to keep things the way it is. It's human nature. I think if I could wave a magic wand is to find some very strong leadership that can corral the industry with a vision of where we need to be and get us there. And that is all encompassing. That means really thinking about really this whole conversation. Where can we drive MLSs? Where can we drive the association? Where can we drive the politicians? How do we bring the other aspects of the industry together? That vision laid out correctly could be an incredible opportunity for people in the business and consumers at the same time. Right now, there's a lot of competing interests. So
You nailed it. That is so analogous to what's going on in the appraisal profession today too, with all the change, right? And the fear of change versus leaning into it and finding a way to drive our industry into the future. And to our earlier point, what an opportunity to have some leadership that starts to take all these into consideration versus again being so disparate and in their own verticals and thinking about only what they think about: MLS, appraisers, real
yep.
estate agents, associations, right? Like mortgage lending. It's really needs to be looked at holistically, and we need leadership to
And
put all this together and organize
and tort reform.
and tort reform.
So
All right, my man. I can't tell you how fun it's been to chat with you. It's always so interesting. You're so knowledgeable. I really appreciate it. It's been a great
My pleasure.
conversation. I
It's
know
been
our
great.
listeners are going to like it. So,
Yep.
thanks for taking the time because I know how busy you are.
Yeah, and anybody who's listening, have them come check out our podcast too. We've got really amazing guests on all the time. So it's just Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered, and we've got all sorts of industry people on there having fun conversations, and it's unfiltered, which makes it fun. So
Highly recommend it. It's great. I love to tune in, and there's a ton of great information that you can
thanks.
glean from your podcast. So, thanks,
Appreciate that.
James.
Absolutely. All right, buddy.
All right. Take care.
You got it.
Bye. Well, that's a wrap on episode 4 of the Lending Edge podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with James as much as I did. Clearly, James is extremely insightful and knowledgeable around the impacts associated to the NAR settlement, the importance that the MLS plays in the process, the potential impact to realtor associations, and the importance of ensuring that we have strong leadership in our industry going forward. And although there's always been a bit of disparity between real estate agents, mortgage finance and lending, real estate appraisal, home inspections, etc., I think with all the change going on in our industries today, which can be challenging for everyone to navigate directly, indirectly, the opportunity is there to leverage this change to really bring more synergies and collaboration and consolidation in terms of how all of these verticals work within each other, creating a better experience for the end stakeholder, the consumer. And I sure hope that's the case. I hope there's not too many unintended consequences that come through this process, and I really hope we're able to leverage all of this to improve the overall experience for everyone involved. Thanks again for listening in. If you did enjoy, please like and subscribe. We'll try to include some links in the description to everything related to James and his businesses. So feel free and please do go check those out and go check out James' podcast, Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered. It's a great show, and I really appreciated him taking the time to come on our show today. Take care.